We've all seen it happen, right? Big, expensive social programs are launched with the best of intentions, and yet they fail. Sometimes they even make things worse. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into the incredible work of MIT's J.W. Forrester to figure out why this happens. And this quote from Forrester really gets to the heart of it. He saw that our efforts to fix social problems often just don't work. And it's not because people are malicious or incompetent, it's because the systems themselves are wired in a way that makes our intuitive solutions backfire in some really unexpected ways. So, that's the big question we're tackling today. Why do our best-laid plans to solve complex social problems so often fail or even create bigger problems down the line? Let's dig in. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We'll start by looking at why good intentions just aren't enough, and we'll focus on the flawed mental models we all use. Then we'll get into the weird, counterintuitive ways social systems behave, run a model of a global crisis, and then finally look at Forrester's ideas for a way out and his vision for the future. So, let's get right to it. Why do good intentions fall flat? Well, Forrester's key insight was that social systems aren't like simple machines. They're what he called multi-loop, nonlinear feedback systems. Now that's a mouthful, but it just means that everything is connected. An action over here can cause an effect way over there, maybe years later, because the output of one thing feeds back in and changes the input of something else. It's messy, it's complex, and it's almost impossible to predict with simple linear thinking. We'll be using causal loop diagrams throughout this to help visualize some of these feedback structures. And here's the real kicker. Our brains just aren't wired for this. We evolved to understand a much simpler world, a world where if you throw a rock, you see it land. Cause and effect are right next to each other. But in the complex systems we live in today, the cause of a problem can be completely disconnected in time and space from where we see the symptom. Our intuition just can't keep up. Okay, so if our intuition isn't reliable, what are we using to make big decisions? Forrester argued that we all rely on what he called mental models. Basically, the stories and assumptions we have in our heads about how the world works. The problem is, these models are, well, they're often wrong. And you can see the difference right here. On one hand, you have our mental models. They're kind of fuzzy, often incomplete, and they can shift around even in the middle of a single conversation. On the other hand, you have formal system dynamics models. These force you to be explicit, to lay all your assumptions out on the table, and to define exactly how you think things are connected. It forces a kind of clarity that our mental models just can't provide. Now get this, because this is probably Forrester's most mind-blowing finding. Even if your mental model is perfectly correct, even if you have all the right pieces in your head, we are still terrible at figuring out what that system will actually do over time. Our brains simply can't simulate all those feedback loops interacting at once. We can't see the long-term consequences of our own assumptions. And this all leads us straight to Forrester's main point. Social systems are fundamentally counterintuitive. They don't behave the way we think they should. To really see what he meant, let's look at one of his most famous examples from his work on urban dynamics. So, what's the intuitive solution to urban poverty? Well, build more low-cost housing, right? Seems obvious. But Forrester's model showed how this can create a nasty trap. The new housing acts like a magnet, attracting more low-income residents to the area. But jobs don't appear at the same rate. So you end up with more people than jobs, which drives down wages and overwhelms the city's services. This is a classic example of a powerful balancing loop that ends up making the original problem even worse. Forrester basically boiled it down to these three dangerous characteristics. First, complex systems tend to resist most of our attempts to change them. Second, there are a few key places, leverage points, where a small push can create a big change, but these points are almost never obvious. And third, these systems are full of trade-offs, where a policy that looks great in the short term ends up causing a disaster in the long term. Okay, so we've looked at the city level. Now let's zoom out, way out, to the entire planet. Back in the 70s, Forrester and a group called the Club of Rome built the World Dynamics model to see what would happen to our global system over the long run. The World Dynamics model is a classic stock and flow model, and it's built on these 5 key stocks, or system levels. You've got population, capital, resources, pollution, and agriculture. The model then connects all the inflows and outflows between these stocks with feedback loops, which lets us simulate what might happen if we change different policies. So what happens in the business-as-usual scenario if we just keep on our current path? Well, the model showed that we'd eventually hit a wall because of resource depletion. As industry grows, it chews through natural resources, they get scarcer, more expensive, and eventually that causes the global economy and population to peak and then decline. But what if we innovate our way out of it? Let's say we have a huge technological breakthrough and cut our resource consumption by 75%. Problem solved, right? Nope. The model showed something much worse. With the resource limit gone, population and industry explode, leading to a massive pollution crisis that causes a sudden, catastrophic collapse. This is a perfect example of the system archetype shifting the burden, where fixing one problem just creates a bigger, nastier one somewhere else.
All right, well, what about another intuitive fix? Let's just goose the economy with more capital investment. The model shows that this is also a disaster. It just makes the pollution-driven collapse happen even faster. Another well-intentioned policy that leads to catastrophe. So after seeing all this, you might be thinking, are we just doomed? Is collapse inevitable? Well, according to Forrester's models, the answer is no. A stable future is actually possible, but it requires us to do some very counterintuitive things. The model actually showed that we can achieve a global equilibrium, a world with a high and even rising quality of life. But, and it's a big but, it requires policies that go against everything we think of as progress. To get to that stable state, the model showed we'd need to do things like reduce the rate of capital investment and actually lower the emphasis on food production. Now, these policies run completely counter to our growth at all costs mindset, but they represent those non-obvious leverage points. By deliberately slowing down the reinforcing loops of industrial growth, we give the planet's natural balancing loops, like its ability to absorb pollution, a chance to catch up and do their job. Now, Forrester was always really clear that these models aren't crystal balls. They're not for predicting the future. They are tools for understanding. And his ultimate conclusion was a huge call to action for all of us. He argued that the most important frontier left for humanity isn't exploring space or even inventing new technology. It's understanding the incredibly complex systems that we ourselves have created, but that we no longer seem to control. So Forrester's work leaves us with this massive question, especially for those of us studying socio-economic system dynamics. If our intuition is a trap, if our gut feelings constantly lead us astray when we're dealing with complexity, then what are we going to build? What tools, what models, what new ways of thinking can we develop to help us all see the world and our place in it just a little bit more clearly?